Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again, I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, one of my favorite musicians of all time, arguably one of the greatest hardcore guitarists ever, Aaron Melnick, from the Inmates, from Integrity, from Die Hard. We'll talk about more of that in a second. But first, if you'd like to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire, and he will get the message to me. You can also find me on Twitter or Instagram at Left4Damian. If you want, there's a YouTube page, a TikTok page, an Instagram page, and a Facebook page, all for Turned Out a Punk. All those can be found at Turned Out a Punk on those platforms. If you want to support the show, tell all your friends about it. Let them all know that you enjoy this podcast over here. I play in a band. We are called Fucked Up. You can find out more information at fuckedup.cc. We're going to be going on tour with the mighty Superchunk across the West Coast, or up the West Coast of the United States and to Canada in a couple weeks. More dates are over there. And that is that. On to today's show. I got my buddy and sometimes co-host with me right here, Camden. Cam, how's it going, bud?
Fine.
You excited for this episode?
No.
No? Well, you're a guitar player, right?
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Here's why I like Aaron Melnick's guitar playing. He has a completely unique approach to the way he plays that instrument. Like, it's not like he's trying to be any other guitar player. Like, we talk about it more on the episode. You can hear it when you listen to the podcast. You're going to listen, right? No? Okay. Well, when you hear the podcast, listening in your headphones right now, you will hear me and Aaron talk about it in a second. Aaron Melnick, of course, is a guitar player from Integrity and the Inmates and Die Hard and all sorts of things. But most recently, he has put out a phenomenal, I guess, solo record, for lack of a better term, but a project called Nuclae, which is a concept record. There's going to be a book coming out at some point. And I didn't hear this thing until close to the end of the year last year, but this is my favorite record from last year. I love this thing so much. You can check this record out now. It is available from the good people at Rebirth Records. There is a Rebirth Big Cartel store. There's also a nuclae.bandcamp.com, and that's Nuclae, Nuclae. And a huge thank you to Bob Wilson from Rebirth Records for setting this thing up, because it's a dream come true. This thing would have been longer. I would have loved to have been longer, but Aaron got home from work just before my kids got home from school, so it's shorter than it should have been. But believe me, there's good stuff in here. Check out Nuclae's Bring Out the Beast. Check out Integrity. If you've never listened to those Integrity records with Aaron on them, go back and check out those things. Also, there's a new Integrity thing too, covers record, that's also worth checking out as well. And Die Hard and the Inmates, all that Cleveland stuff. It's gold. It's gold, I tell ya. All right, I'm not gonna ramble on anymore. Should I keep talking, Cam?
No.
Okay, I'm not gonna ramble on anymore. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Aaron Melnick on Turned Out a Punk.
Of punk.
A punk. Still think it should be of.
It's of.
Oh, it's ah.
What they know.
Okay, stop. Okay. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, I appreciate being here, man. Thank you for having me.
Well, as I was, we're just talking off air, and I think I briefly mentioned it, but I don't know if I expressed it, but like, I think your new record is unbelievable, and it's Nuclea, right? New project?
It's Nuclae, it's called.
Nuclae. Sorry.
Nuclae.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it is a fantastic record, and it really hit me then listening to it that you're almost like a great auteur guitar player, where you have this way of playing and this sound that's so uniquely you, and just hearing it just comes across, and it's just and no one else can play like you. And as soon as you hear it, you know it's you playing it. It's just it's a fantastic album.
Hey, I appreciate it, because I worked so hard. I mean, it's pretty much was like 5 years in the making, and just kept putting little snippets together, kept doing different songs, trying them one way, and just you know, it was a lot of work, and I just wanted to be as good as I could make it. I won't say it's perfect, but and then you know, I got to work with my friend Rob Orr from Unreal City and my brother, so that was good. And you know, my brother always can kind of figure out what I'm thinking, and he can just kind of play exactly what he needs to play. And Rob is actually this exact same way.
Well, it's
Yeah,
kind of awesome because like I think you can kind of like track your career through all your different projects. And you know, obviously your brother and Rob's involvement too, and in more recent years too, where there's got like I don't know, it's just such a cool sound that you've developed, especially with your brother, where you guys kind of like work together so well and have found like very early on you found this, but like it has continued to kind of evolve this interplay with your different styles.
yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate that actually. Um, yeah, I mean, it's strange because you know, I think just growing up together, our parents made us play different instruments when we were kids, and like at the time, I was like, oh my god, I gotta play this violin, and it was, you know, and he played cello, so it's kind of interesting that I ended up playing guitar and he played bass, but you know, we just kind of we've been able to meld that together and kind of develop things together that way. So
Well, yeah, it's really interesting with the violin and the cello because I imagine, you know, I have no musical ability, and my brother
I
plays,
won't
but
say that.
no, what I do is a very unique lead singer only kind of thing.
Yeah,
But I imagine the cello and the violin have a very similar interplay as guitar and bass do in rock and roll, where there's sort of this sort of need to be present and but lay back for the bass sounds and be upfront and kind of vibrant, and especially with violin and your guitar playing and just kind of like virtuosic.
yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was not virtuosic at the guitar, at the violin though. I was like, like I remember I quit as soon as I could, and then you know my parents had an old acoustic, and it was like a real crappy acoustic. Like it was just like it, and but I picked it up, and I just like I didn't know anything, but I knew that I liked some like kind of like early punk and hardcore stuff that I'd heard on the radio and stuff. Because in Cleveland we have really good radio that will play like punk and hardcore college radio, and then I would just like put my finger up and down the guitar, and I was and we that was we started doing bands when I was like 13 or maybe even 12, and I would make my brother sing my lyrics, and he would do it even though he'd be like he wasn't as into it, you know what I mean? But that was our band, and my friend played chopsticks on a box, so I was trying to make music as early as that. So
Well, I guess that leads me to kind of the question, which is, Aaron, how did you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it? Was it through the radio like that?
well, it's kind of it kind of depends what you define as punk because in 82 and 83 my my dad moved us to England for a year, so my first I got I got to see their what they were into, and they had Top of the Pops, and even though
Yeah.
that's like a pop show at the time, you know, like I guess, you know, Bauhaus, I remember She's in Parties was real big, and I think Susie was on there. It's kind of hard to remember that far back now, but I mean, so I got kind of introduced to some form of punk, you
Hmm.
know, at that time, and then but then when we moved back to America, you know, I just would listen to the radio, and it was actually there's a station WRUW, which is associated with Case Western, and then WCSB, which is Cleveland State University, and they both have great radio shows. This and back then they had John Carroll, which is a Christian university. They actually had like a lot of punk. They had a show called Boots Upside Your Head, which they'd like play suicidal tendencies and stuff like that. But I mean, I used to just sit there with like the cassette and my cassette there, and then record and play, and then had it on pause. And I hear the first note of something, I hit record, and then I'd listen for 20 seconds. I'd be like, that one's not so good, and I just stop it and rewind again. Or sometimes like that song's amazing. So I guess I think the first like I don't even know if you would call this hardcore or punk, but the first song I heard was Peace Corps,
Oh,
Quincy's
definitely.
Lament. You know
Oh,
that?
that's hardcore to me, or punk too. I
Yeah,
love that's a killer
yeah.
track.
And so I heard that, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" And like to me, like the guitar solo sounded like I was like, that guitarist is amazing. Oh my God. They're like, you know, they're like, wow. They're just playing like one solos, you know, but at the time, like it blew my mind. And then I just kind of, you know, I just try to pick everyone's brain. I'd start going to the local record stores, and sometimes you'd buy something that was good, you know, and you just try to connect the dots and see what you could find out. And I had a hunger for it to find out like as much as I could about, and you know, it could be punk, hardcore. I kind of gravitate towards metal as well, so and other kinds of music too, but especially at that time period, especially those.
Well, I think it's interesting with especially Peace Corps and that sort of like there are bands like Die Kreutzen. I put Peace Corps in there. There are these bands that have this sort of interesting guitar thing, and you like Septic Death's another one, of course, where you've
Yeah,
got like these bands that have this sort of yeah, just like heavy kind of raging like wild guitar that it's almost metal without being metal.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you there. Peace Corps, yeah, almost that sound like da na na
Yeah.
na na. That's almost like it's metal in a way. It's like proto metal, or it's like primitive metal or something, you know?
Very, yeah, exactly. And that's like the kind of my that's the kind of metal I like, you know, and I find that's like the
Yeah,
Cleveland Nunslaughter kind of metal is
yeah,
primitive metal.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I I gravitate towards kind of like the caveman type, you know, those simple riffs, and like there's something genius about like the simple riff that's just so catchy.
Hmm.
When you try to overcomplicate things, a lot of times, I mean, there's bands that can do that and they do it well, and there's great bands that can do that. But for me and like what I've always tried to play, I've tried to keep it simple, you know. And I think when I keep it simple, I do the best at getting across the feelings that I have, you know, because I think music is really, yes, it's there's the sonic part that you hear, but there's also so much feeling in music, and that's really important to me.
Well, and I think that's what I've loved about that kind of non-commercial record scene. Like we're jumping way into the future with this stuff,
Yeah,
but I think it was like that kind of like caveman punk kind of vibe to it, like especially the inmate stuff. And I guess it goes back to the 90s with those some of those bands, especially the inmates' first singles.
yeah,
And but there was like sort of this simplicity to it, but that's what makes it brilliant is that like knowing when to keep it simple and when to have the space in there and when to there's a genius to the simplicity.
yeah. I feel that that's true for hardcore in general. I feel that, you know, especially hardcore and punk as well. It's uh it's almost always the simple stuff that is, you know, that resonates with me, and I think it resonates with most people as well. The simplest hardcore is, you know, that's usually stuff that sticks in your head, you know, like Misfits, for instance.
Mm.
That's it's genius in the simplicity, you know, or
Yeah.
Reagan Youth or something. It's like two riff punk basically, you know, or hardcore. And I have a hard time with the definitions a little bit because I think there's a lot of overlap in all the styles with metal, hardcore, and punk. And you see that in a lot of bands now. They'll play mixtures of it, and that's awesome. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it really has become a lot more integrated sound wise with kids because I think you don't have to choose in the same way. Like before, it was hard to know about all this stuff because you had to go and buy these records and you had to dress a certain way, and there were a lot of
Yeah.
rules back then. But now it doesn't seem like they apply in the same way.
No. I remember if you went to a metal show, I remember we went and saw Slayer, and it was all we all had short hair, and we were hardcore kids, you know,
Yeah.
and and it was like the first time Slayer had assigned seats, and I think it was the South of Heaven tour. I don't remember exactly which tour it was, but and and there was these metal guys in our seats, and we are like, hey, these are our seats, and they're like, well, we're sitting here now, like, you know, fuck you, short hairs guy, you know, like
Yeah, what are you gonna do
mentality, and
about
like,
it, man? Yeah.
yeah, and like, and then we told like one of the bouncers, and he didn't care, and so
Yeah.
he's like, just sit there together or something. And I was like, okay, and then we were just like, okay, well, we can't have this. We're like, you guys got to go, and then so there was like, you know, there was kind of a fracas. Actually, Paul was with me, so Paul from Non-Commercial and the inmates and stuff. So so we got them out of there. But at the time, we were worried because we'd been to other metal shows, and the metalheads they did not like short-haired people back then, which is crazy because once Kerry King shaved his head, then all of a sudden metalheads were like, well, short hair is great, we don't care.
It was, yeah, there was, and even into like, it's so fascinating now in sort of like a post metalcore kind of world, but like even when there were those early kind of package bills where you'd have hardcore bands on tour with metal bands, there'd always be fights. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
Just constantly skirmishes.
Yeah. I remember early Integrity shows there, it was kind of interesting because there would be like that, there was that kind of, friction between those, because Integrity tended to attract a lot of different, you get like skinheads, you would get metalheads, you would get hardcore kids, straight edge kids, you would get everybody, and then just put them into like, there'd be like, a few hundred people at later shows, and put them all together and play kind of, aggressive music, and there would always be some sort of trouble, back then. Usually in the pit, which was a little bit more healthy, but
Cleveland at any era, when you look at all these bands that were kind of coexisting, maybe not peacefully at times, but like at least coexisting spatially and sonically, there's just so much different approaches to punk. And like I'm like you, like I find the definitions hard at times or the defining of these things hard sometimes because it's all punk to me at the end of the day.
yeah,
And like that's what and when I think you guys in Cleveland, like broadly speaking, like that's what it embodies. And Cleveland's kind of the birthplace of punk after all, right? Like going back to the Electric Eels and going back to Rocks from the
yeah,
Tombs and everything, right? Like it
yeah.
starts in Cleveland.
It's one of them. Yeah, I mean those bands are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think Electric Eels are pretty. People don't know about that as much, and I can see how they might be. The voice maybe can be kind of abrasive to some people. I love it personally.
Oh,
but,
same. Well, like you're talking about that.
And then,
go on. Sorry, let me cut you off.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, and Rocket from the Tombs. That band is. Yeah. That's some of those songs are so. Just I don't. I can't. I wish I could write songs like that.
Well, that's the thing. You listen to that Rock from the Tombs record, and you're like, what is it this band was like from New York, at this time, was able to get a record out? It's like the best Dead Boys songs, the best Perubu songs, the best Peter Lofner songs, and they're all like in one band.
Yeah, that's so crazy. That's
so
true.
Crazy.
And it's because I found, when I was a kid, like 13 or 14, I found Dead Boys, Not a Living Dead Boys. It was like $3 at this place, Wax Stacks, which was an awesome record store that's now gone. And I grew up with that Night of Living Dead Boys. That was like my favorite Dead Boys, actually. To me, that was like, because it's so raw, even though it sounds kind of shitty, but it's like, it's just a great record. Then later on, I discovered that Rock from the Tomb stuff, and I was just like, this is better than Dead Boys. It's crazy. I didn't know you could get better than that. So.
Yeah, it's wild to think about how fully formed the stuff in Cleveland was that early. Like they're just, and all of Ohio too, Devo too. There's just like something in the Midwest at that time that just like an energy that like it's in New York too. It's in all over the world, kind of popping up, but it's just definitely in Cleveland. Like it's really in Cleveland.
I think a little bit of Detroit also. Before that, you have the Stooges and like we were talking about Negative Approach before, and that stuff. I think there's some sort of back and forth dialogue between Detroit and Cleveland, and Detroit has. To me, Detroit is, if there's so many good bands from Detroit, not just in like more extreme kinds of music, but also in terms of like Motown and stuff like that. I mean, it's such a rich city in terms of music as well. So the Midwest, I think, is a good way to phrase it or frame it for sure.
Yeah, because I think the Gizmos as well, and doing what they were doing, Gulcher Records and that kind of proto-punk scene.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, it feels like it's kind of like when punk first arrives, it's at least in America, and I guess in Canada too, because in Hamilton they're like Simply Saucers kind of going, and they're all, in communication with each other, but there's sort of this sort of post Dream of the '60s, cynicism, post Watergate cynicism, post Charles Manson thing
Yeah.
where people are just fed up, and there's a failed industrial kind of world around them, and it just feels ripe that it would be starting in kind of the Midwest and industrial centers.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, and like Cleveland was, and Detroit, I know, and I'm sure probably in Canada, in the Midwest, around the lakes and stuff like that, everything's like kind of almost rusting from they call it the Rust Belt. It was like it was falling apart from the inside almost. And like Cleveland, a lot of people, there's flight from the cities and stuff like that, um, and then people were just, and Detroit, if you drove into Detroit in the late '80s, early '90s, I mean, it was pretty, and Chicago too. All those cities, they were getting pretty run down at that time. So now I think there's kind of a renaissance of people are returning to cities more. It seems like, I don't, but at that time it was something different. It was definitely different.
Yeah, and like now it feels like it's almost like the nightmarish return to the cities where everything's too expensive and no one can afford to live in these cities anymore.
Yeah.
And it's
Oh my God.
yeah, but
Yeah.
back to more pleasant things. So where did you kind of go from hearing this punk stuff and getting into this stuff on kind of the radio and being exposed to it? Like were other kids around you getting into it too?
Yeah. There was other kids. I started going to some hardcore shows. There's this place called the Variety Theater where I think Motorhead played so loud the ceiling eventually collapsed, so they closed it. I think they're trying to reopen it now, but there was shows back then, and that was a very interesting kind of a wake up call for me to see like this stuff in action and like see a real pit for the first time. And just I think the first hardcore show I went to was I would go to other shows. Like there was also like a strong alternative scene in Cleveland, but the first hardcore show I saw was like Government Issue and Toxic Reasons, and that was pretty sweet.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And then and that was at the Variety Theater, and later there was a band Groin from Cleveland, and I met some of those guys. They were a little older than me, but they were a pretty great band actually. Just straight hardcore, pretty much. Like, are you looking for something?
1 second, yeah.
Oh shit! God's Not American. That's right.
Yeah,
That's
a fantastic tape.
Yeah, that is amazing. I love that.
Wow, that's so funny.
Yeah, my friend Dana actually he played on that from Keel Hall. So.
Oh, that's right. And also funny. I met this summer. I was in Philadelphia with my son on tour with the band, and Chris from Keel Hall and the Inmates was in a record store that I was in. He's like, "Hey, I'm from the Inmates," and I was like, "Oh my God!" And Keel Hall too, and False Hope and all this shit. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's pretty actually. The Cleveland scene, it was weird too because those were that first wave. False Hope was kind of on the cusp of like more like towards integrity, but before that there was like the Guns and
the Dark, right?
Terrorists. Yeah, the Dark, and there's so many other, and they were kind of like the old guard, Starvation Army, stuff like that. And they, I don't know if they, I mean, some of them liked us, but some of them, how the generational thing is. It's kind of like these new guys, they don't know what it's all about. They probably thought that about us a little bit. But I grew up being a fan of that stuff, so I tried to be cool with everybody. But there was a little bit of that. But False Hope was on the cusp, so we would grow up and we saw False Hope and Confront and Outface. They would always play shows, and we started our band. At first it was called Common Sense, then it became Die Hard, which eventually became Integrity. And we would play this place. There was this place on the west side called Berea Rolling Ball, which was a huge skate park and like a huge warehouse. And the sound was terrible there. It would be totally echoing and stuff like that. And but we would we brought some bands there, like Tom from Confront. I think he was the promoter he brought Underdog. He brought like Zero Tolerance, and I think that they, not that venue, but like some of the, like I remember like who was it? It was like Project X and Gorilla Biscuits and a couple other bands. I forget the other bands now.
There's a famous photo, right, from that show. It's like you and Dwight beside each other watching.
Yeah, it's a funny photo. Yeah, but that was, I mean, I was like, holy shit, like here's Project X, and Life's Blood played there, so they were kind of like a little bit of the black sheep, I think. But and Life's Blood they were like they played that song, which I don't know, but break down the walls to get inside.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's interesting. They played that song at that show, but but yeah, that was amazing. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, they're super. Life's Blood's one of my favorite bands from that era. But you're right. There's kind of like a division in that scene. It felt like certainly between
Yeah,
them and some of the other bands.
there seems like there's always divisions
Hmm.
between scenes, which is, I was talking about the older generation, the younger generation, which it's cool when there's people that try to step outside of that and don't, you try. It's because we're, think about it, there's not, most people don't like punk and hardcore.
Yeah.
So if you find someone that likes punk and hardcore, no matter what the era, what the style is, I try to find common ground with people because I think it's important to, I think it's how many of the, I've thought about this more and more the older I get. Like we should all be, if there's teams, we should all be on the same team. You know what I mean? We should all support each other in that way, which is maybe when I was younger, I wasn't quite thinking like that, or it's such a big picture. But now I see like that's really important.
I think now that I'm older, I realize how much of it is born out of insecurity and
Yeah.
finding something that you love and being so like, I need to hold on to this and no one can take what's this perfect thing that's mine. And I finally
Yeah.
found it, and I feel, yeah. And you really, cause you do see it happen in every scene. And there's almost like this natural process that people have to go through.
Yeah, people they almost take ownership of, let's say you wrote a song or I wrote a song. They almost take ownership, and I do that with other kinds of music too. I take ownership of the song as well. I'm like, wow, that song means so much to me. Like, and then when I was younger, if something maybe got more popular, I would maybe be like, oh, that's getting popular now. I don't, but now I'm like, yeah, I can see why it got popular because it was great.
Yeah.
So and band, it's good that when I think it opens people's minds and it turns people on to new music that maybe they would have never heard if a band gets bigger, or maybe they influence somebody else to make something interesting and different. So that's important to me. So,
I think it's awesome that we're into that kind of like other side of Cleveland music because I love that. It's, I guess, St. Valentine's Records to kind of
yeah,
put our
yeah,
name on it. Like, I love all
yeah,
those bands. I think
yeah.
Death of Samantha and
I
Shadow
loved.
of,
I saw Death to Samantha. That's before I saw hardcore. I saw Death to Samantha, and I was a pretty big fan actually. So
great band. Awesome,
yeah,
fantastic band. Were
that,
you? Oh, go
actually
on. Sorry.
that guitar player Doug Gillard, he was in a different band called. Have you heard of Children's Crusade?
Great band. Oh,
That's
fantastic band.
amazing. That Lurker on the Threshold. So they had a comp. That was one of the first kind of punkish, because there's punk bands on there too, but there's also whatever St. Valentine's record is. I don't know. I guess it's punk.
Punk. Yeah,
But
for me it's punk.
it's
Yeah.
not like oi 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 or whatever.
No,
Or whatever.
but if you look at like the original wave of this stuff, and you're like, you look at all the people that kind of were under that umbrella of, like you were saying, like Susie and the Banshees to early Cure to Sex
Yeah,
Pistols to Damn to Jam to, it was broad, and I think anything that came out of that is part of it.
yeah, I agree. Even if you just have a little bit of influence in that, and it's good to be able to draw on the bigger that you can draw on, the bigger pool you can draw on of stuff, the more you can kind of make something maybe that is a little different, and and but it still represents you. So I think that's important, I think, as well.
Yeah, I
But
think I definitely agree with that.
yeah, just yeah, but going back to that, yeah, the St. Valentine's, and then all the English stuff like that. I mean, that's there's so much. There's I wish I could show you my record collection right now. I have so much different stuff. There's I just have a huge amount of stuff that I like. I like almost everything. I don't know. I've become more open as I've gotten older. So
I think with also that Cleveland stuff, like actually, if I showed you my record collection, I have a Cleveland section of my
uh,
LPs and my 7 inches, just because I find like when you take Death of Samantha and you take like Integrity and you take Confront, you take H100s, and you really put all
yeah,
of it, and then all that earlier stuff too. It's
yeah,
such an incredible music town, but there's a lineage to it, and everyone seems to
yeah.
like. connect in some way to each other.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Actually, Integrity would play with H100s sometimes, and that would, that would be interesting because like the typical Integrity fan probably didn't know how to take the H100s. You know, they were kind of confrontational in a different way. You know, so that was always pretty interesting. It's because they're so abrasive. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh
But
God. Yeah.
yeah, I do think there is a lineage to it, and it's it's interesting, you know, as different as you would think all these bands are. And you mentioned Devo before. You know, I know Devo is that's that's definitely something that in some ways has creeped into my music, definitely into like Ringworm's music or someone like that. You know, just I mean, they were just out there. They were geniuses, but that's just that's just like, but I mean, that's punk as well. Because yeah, because punk is almost like it's almost like it's almost like undefined in a way. If you're undefined, that's more punk than anything, I think. When you try to define something and try to make it, you know, like, oh, it can only fit into this, that's not very punk. You know?
Yeah. Well, like to me, the greatest punk song, one of the greatest punk songs ever, is that to bring it back to what you're saying about minimalism, is that Dave E from Electric Eels. So it
Yeah, I
is.
mean, those guys definitely they have other songs that are just crazy that like that song about cancer and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but it's cool when bands do that though, and they come so like L.A. Blues or something like that. That's like, you know, I mean, you know, that was before there's punk, but obviously, you know, Iggy gets or the Stooges, I should say, get lumped into that. But I mean, L.A. Blues, that's like what is it? It's like an amorphous mess, but it works though. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And it's that's the thing is I think with punk is it's that it's finding the beauty in the mess and making the mess beautiful.
Yeah, I agree.
Uh,
I agree.
were you a fan of Guided by Voices at all? I was really curious about that. Speaking of St.
Oh,
Valentine's and Death and Samantha, it kind of connects in a weird way
yeah,
with
is
memory.
Doug Gillard in Guided
Doug
by
Gillard
Voices?
yeah, Guided by Voices for a while.
I don't know it as well, but it's something I probably should look at. I think I might have gone to a show and Children's Crusade maybe played there,
That
but I
makes
don't.
sense.
Well, I'm not. I can't remember because my memory is pretty shot from over the years. But now my memory's better because I'm sober.
Yeah.
But
Well, if you do decide to get into Guided by Voices, there's a lot of records. They're really a band that I've found. You know, I've definitely liked some stuff by them, but they're an impenetrably difficult band to kind of get a grip on everything because there's hundreds of, like maybe 1,000 songs. I don't know. That's probably an
oh, shit.
exaggeration, but a lot of shit, like box sets worth of material. It's
Is there a record that you would steer someone to? If they were just
uh,
getting into.
Be 1,000, I think it's called. I feel like this is one of those bands that if you like, it's like the Grateful Dead. Like if people
Yeah.
hear you misquote it or say the wrong thing, they get
Yeah.
very upset.
Uh
But
oh.
they can write songs. They have multiple different lineups over the years and stuff. And I think
uh,
at one point, like I know John from Death of Samantha was in the band for a little
uh,
bit, and I think there were
okay, I think that's right. Yeah.
several other dudes that kind of crossed over to it.
Yeah. Yeah, he was at he wrote for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and he would write a lot of cool stuff. He would try to turn people on to different things. And,
Well, I was going to ask, were there any people that crossed over between, like you're saying, there was kind of standoffishness between the two scenes, but was there any bands that kind of crossed over, existed in both kind of worlds?
I don't know if any bands did, but there were. I mean, Chris Smith, who later joined Integrity, he was kind of and he was in False Hope. He was kind of and he wasn't in the Guns really, but he was kind of he played with the guys from the Guns, so he kind of walked in a lot of worlds, and he walks in a lot of worlds anyway. So he because he's very I don't know he's very open minded when it comes to music as well. So
Yeah.
and also he works at a record pressing plant, so he meets a lot of musicians, so that I think he just knows a lot of people. But he'd be someone who walks in those worlds. But I don't know if there's actually a band that kind of transcends that. At least not be. It's hard to say because like when you start your first band, you kind of see everything before you with kind of a real like a microscope.
Mm.
You know what I mean? You're really looking at everything. But once you like kind of get a little bit older, it's harder to say what's exactly happening. I feel like because you're kind of doing stuff. Maybe because I started doing stuff, so I became more concerned with what I was doing. Not to say that I closed myself off to other music, but you kind of when you really internalize what's going on in the scene before you get into it, but then like after you get into it, it might be a little bit harder, to focus on everybody else. So
It becomes your own journey after a while. You stop looking at it as other people's journeys and realize it's like your own thing. And
yeah,
it must have, it's, I guess, like Integrity, it's like 10 years, but what an incredible run for a hardcore band, a DIY hardcore band too. At that point,
yeah,
it's just, yeah, a lot of shit happening, I imagine.
it was crazy.
Hey everyone, now that the holidays are over, Factor's ready to eat meal delivery has got your resolutions covered. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning, so you get to skip the grocery stores, the prep work, and the cooking fatigue because they have 35 chef crafted options each week. So whether you want to try going veggie or vegan like myself, whether you're like one of my kids trying to eat anything and everything that you can find, whether you're trying to go keto or calorie wise, they've got you. And there's 55 add-ons that you can also put on there, so you'll have tons of nutritious and flavorful options. Whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, Factor's meals are ready in 2 minutes, and there's snack options as well, and juices and smoothies and all sorts of things. It's been amazing having Factor in the house because whether it's meals for myself or, as I said, meals for my kids, I don't have to do overpriced takeout anymore. There's delicious food that's available right down there in our refrigerator. And it was all delivered right to my door. And it was great for me having some of these vegan meals in the house because there was no stress for me. There was no cooking, no cleanup after I'd made food for the kids. I could just pop down, grab one of these, and it's ready in 2 minutes. Or if the kids were hungry, I'd send them down and they could get one of the meat options, and once again, it's ready in 2 minutes. And you don't have to just take my word for it. You can head over to factormeals.com/TOAP50 and use the code TOAP50 to get 50% off your Factor meals. That code again is TOAP50 at factormeals.com/TOAP50 to get that 50% off and see for yourself. Delicious, nutritious. And I get the kids on the podcast, but they don't feel like coming on to do the ads. I gotta pay them, and oh my god, that gets messy.
The early days were really crazy. So it was just, I mean, I just think about it was chaotic. Like you were talking about a mess and like just how things are messes. I mean, it wasn't just like, I mean, sometimes musically it'd be a mess too, but usually we held it together, you know, but it was just in terms of like where we would go. We went to, I remember the first time we went to Europe was like insane. We didn't have work permits. We got kicked out of England. Uh, we had crazy roadies with us that were, they were pretty insane. And
were they European roadies or guys that you brought?
No, we brought a few people from America, and they just like, and I don't think I mean, none of us were used to like 10% beer, but in particular, a couple of them really, they just acted like fools. So it added to the mystique a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Like, and then when we went back to, they're like, where is this person, this crazy person? They're like, oh yeah, you didn't come this time, but I mean, yeah, the things could be very messy, but it was cool though, because you don't, when you're young, you're just like striking that path, and you don't realize like, these are like the times that are, not only did it shape us musically and stuff like that, but it also, you don't realize, time is a crazy thing. It starts accelerating as you get older, and you don't realize like you might not ever be able to get that back, like that kind of those experiences where you can just be like wild and play music and just like be free in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Responsibility starts hitting hard when you get older, especially if you have a family and stuff like that. So.
It definitely changes everything.
Yeah.
With the time is something that appreciates so much. Like every day, it just feels like, gosh, and especially that moment in hardcore where it felt like it wasn't being watched by the mainstream in the way like it is now. And
No.
it was completely an independent world.
Yeah. It seems it's pretty crazy now. I see like a lot of hardcore bands are getting some serious notoriety, which more power to them. And actually, it's strange because there was the time I would say like in the 2000s I kind of was like not as aware of hardcore, but now I pay attention to hardcore now, and I think there's like a lot of good music coming out. It's almost like maybe because it's been so long, or maybe it's just I was deaf to things or something, but there's some really good stuff coming out nowadays. So
Yeah, it feels like there's just I guess it's cyclical in a way, but like it does feel like this is definitely an upside right now with everything that's happening where like bands are extremely there's just so much stuff happening and it's
yeah,
fascinating to see. It was fascinating to talk about like how metal and punk used to not mix and now you look at the success of Power Trip and bands like that and it's like wow,
yeah,
it is.
it's seamless for them. They don't even have double bass, but they're like heavy as hell.
But it's funny how much of an influence you guys are on all this metallic hardcore. I guess and now it like, once again it gets broken into subgenres, but just how many people try and do what you do on guitar and try and approach it, not able to kind of sound like you, but they are trying to do what you do. And it is such an influence on this music after you guys, like you're one of those bands where it's not the same sonically after Integrity.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think though I feel like from my point of view, it felt like everything was heading that way kind of, and we just like kind of continued it. It's because there was bands like COC or Pro-Mags, they were getting more metal, and but I like the hardcore aspect, and also I would listen like Side by Side and stuff like that. I mean, Pro-Mags I guess were hardcore, and then they became metal, but
Well,
so it's just I feel like we were just kind of going with the what was naturally happening.
well, that's
You
the thing is
know?
like I feel like a lot of those bands were going metal, and that's what crossover always seemed to me. It's like, oh, punk bands going more metal. And with Integrity, that's why it
Yeah,
threw me off so much when you said Peace Corps because like it's that thing of being metal without ever being metal. And it's not like trying
yeah.
to go to metal. It's like that's just there. And that's why it threw me off when you said that band because I'm like, "Oh, that explains exactly what I hear in Integrity." Like so much.
Yeah,
Like
maybe that like hearing that as my first snippet, I was like, oh, anybody could do this. I could do this too,
yeah, exactly.
because it's like pretty. I mean, it's very simple. It's like 0 0 3 2 2 3 2. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
but I love that though. I mean, and you look at like Negative Approach or something like that. Those riffs are like so simple, and it's just as and or someone like early Master Front, and it's just really, I don't know. It pretty much anybody can do it. If you pick up a guitar, you should be able to play a hardcore song within at least a couple years, I would think. But to do it tastefully and really get that feeling out is, that's why there's some great hardcore bands. But also, but I would like to say one other thing though, because hardcore, like people tend to like say, okay, this band's great, but a lot of like there's so many comps with only like I only know one song by this band, but this song's amazing. You know what I mean? This band, like, they must be great. I only know this song from them, but there's so much like to me that's such a big part of hardcore too. That is kind of, and those bands don't get the notoriety as much maybe because they didn't put out a record, but that shapes it so much. That's such a big part of it. I feel like.
Well, and then there are some bands where the comp kind of makes their like Siege. Those Siege songs on that Pusshead comp that just
Yeah,
spurned on like all the bootlegs and generations of people trying to hear the demo tape and things like that because those songs are just so legendary on that comp. That comp's killer too. Poison Ideas on it, Execute. Like what a classic record that is. But you're right. Like there are not every band, but like most bands have one killer song in them, and then fewer
yeah,
bands, but still a lot have one great 7-inch in them, and then a smaller number have one great LP in them, and then very few bands in hardcore have multiple LPs in them.
Yeah. Well, I think there's that first record burnout. It happens to a lot of bands, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the first record is like they come out of the gate screaming, and then a lot of people are like, well, what now? What are we gonna do now? You know, or you know, some bands change. Like you were talking about Die Kreuzen, they changed a lot from their first record, and and what a lot of hardcore bands do is they go more metal. So
Yeah,
I don't
like
know.
I
Integrity
guess
kind of do the opposite though. We were metal and then we became hardcore.
well, I was going to ask you like, so Common Cause is first, and then it becomes Die Hard. What's the original singer of Die Hard's name again? Stork.
Yeah, but actually, yeah, Dwid was the original singer of Die Hard,
Oh, Dwight was before
and
Stork.
then yeah, but then then there was some drama and he was out, and then we had Stork for a little while, and then Integrity started soon after that.
So is Integrity's first lineup basically Die Hard without like Dwight comes
It
back?
kind of is. Well, I played bass in Die
Yeah.
Hard and Common Sense, and I really wanted to play guitar. Like I only played bass because they're like you know I was like they're like yeah you could be in the band, but if you play bass, I was like okay I'm a guitar player, but I'll play bass so I could be in a band. You know I was like 16, so you know even though I'd been in many bands before that, but they were just all basement bands. But, and then so you know I started bass, and then we had that you know where Jordan was out of Die Hard for a little while, and then me and Tom from Confront were like, we want to start like a heavy band. We want to start something more heavy and more kind of like maybe less hardcore. And we started writing songs together, and then Wood was like, hey, we should do a band with me singing. I was like, yeah, we should, you know. And then Die Hard went to the studio. It went to Mars, which is where all the Integrity stuff that I was on was recorded, and we recorded the Die Hard LP, and there was a little like time left at the end of the tape, I think, and so we did the Integrity demo on the end of that, and basically it was just you know Tom played bass, I played guitar, and Tony played drums, and then we sang over that, and that became. But then like Die Hard somehow got phased out. I don't know. It's hard to remember that far back exactly why, but maybe like Scott wasn't so into the guitars from Die Hard, and I wanted to go full bore with the band that I was playing guitar in because that was really my dream to play guitar in a band.
Mm.
So that's why Integrity, I think, and also you know, Dwight obviously is a motor behind things. He makes things happen. So we kind of made it happen together, you know.
Yeah, and I think Integrity just seems like it had like a vibe right from the get go. Like it really does. You know, like the first 7-inch obviously isn't as fully realized as some of the other stuff would be in like the demo, but it's already kind of going in that direction. Like it's not like it came out of nowhere on the next recording.
No, I mean, yeah, it was we were definitely we were trying to do something I think a little different, you know, and even like people like I looked up to that like older friends of mine when they heard the demo in the 7-inch, they were like, that's pretty good, you know, like all right, Melnick, you did all right. This, you know, I'd be like oh, yeah, I'm doing good. You know, so that was cool. It's cool to have like people that you look up to like what you do, you know. So and then we just kind of I don't know, we practiced so much, we played so many, we just started playing shows right away. Our first show wasn't even in Cleveland, and Cleveland didn't really, I don't know, Cleveland didn't really accept us right away either. And it was, you know, Cleveland's kind of a strange town to break into, but we had a nucleus of you know, there was probably like 30 kids who you know would go see False Hope every time they played, and False Hope started getting you know bigger crowds towards the end of their existence. Yeah, there was kind of just a nucleus of people that we would all go see False Hope, and Confront would play, and then I think you know Confront changed during the course of what they were too. They kind of started off they had songs like Macho Man and Self Destruction, which I don't know if those are available to.
Yeah, I think
people.
there's like a Lost and Found CD that has like a bunch of recordings on it, but I've never
Okay,
gotten that CD.
yeah, okay, I forgot that existed actually. So
Yeah.
that probably has that stuff. So yeah, but otherwise, like the 7-inch was more of their new material, and they kind of you know how there's like Schism Records in New York. It was kind of like Confront kind of moved a little bit apart from False Hope, and then False Hope broke up soon after anyway. But you know, because False Hope were partiers too, and Confront was straight edge, so it was good. And it was interesting how those things, you know, now it doesn't seem as big a deal, but at the time that really mattered, you know. So
Well, it's interesting to like look at that sort of spread of straight edge kind of post, I guess, youth crew stuff happening in New York, and just where it does take hold, and there are like it changes the way kids dressed in hardcore, it changed the way kids approach shows. Like it was
yeah,
really like like you're saying, a schism.
yeah. And then also, I told you those guys came to town and played. Like after that, nobody, like before that in Cleveland, everyone was doing circle pits. But after that, nobody was doing circle pits. Everyone was like dancing hard. You know what I mean? And that's when you start seeing more modern dance styles start to form. I mean, not as maybe not as crazy. I saw Mind Force in Detroit a couple months ago or something at that Coda's Life show, and they and the kids were going pretty crazy for Mind Force, especially. I think like just because it's more younger kids dancing for that band more than and they're doing crazy stuff with it. You know, that's how they do it now.
Well, like you're saying,
But
it's
you can see the evolution of the pit. You know, it's
100%.
crazy.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's fascinating when you watch that. So the scene in America's Hardcore where Rollins is talking about that first Teen Idols tour where they went out to the West Coast and saw
yeah,
kids slamming, and
yeah,
they brought that back to the East Coast and then showed up in New York and beat up all the kids in New York, which of course makes New York harder. And then, like you're saying, New York has hard style dancing, which eventually kind of gets
yeah.
spread around, and now it's just evolved to, like you're saying, like really really hard dancing.
Yeah. I mean, even in like the 2000s, I remember I lived in New York for like 5 years, and I kind of I at that time I wasn't really like going out that many hardcore shows, but I went to see Frank was in Terror. Frank from Hatebreed at the time, he was in Terror, so and he was playing, so I was like, oh, I'll go see Sick of It All in Terror, and then like for Sick of It All, like people like were going insane, and there was like a guy with a Boston jersey there, I remember, and like he was kind of holding his own, I guess. But I mean, they were like, I'm not sure if they were targeting or if not, but I couldn't even pay attention to that because people were going so like, if you just like looked away, even I was like in more of the back of the club, and you know, because I didn't know anybody, I wasn't going to go in the pit at that show, and people were like, and you had to even watch like in the back of the club. So I stood behind this cute girl. I was like, oh, she's not going to do anything, and then she was like throwing haymakers too. I was just like, okay, this is New York.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like tiny little rooms. Like I talked to Jimmy G recently from Murphy's Law, and you know, I was saying how I was researching and read that Cavity Creeps, his first band, had a song called Pain, and during Pain, everyone would line up on one side of the room and form a wall and just hurt the other side of the room as much as possible. And it's like the A7 with 20 people there, and now you're thinking
Yeah,
they do that at festivals with thousands of people now.
yeah, man. I'm too old for that.
Oh man, yeah, I think
I
you
would
know,
get a broken hip or
yeah.
something.
But there's also like the legendary stories of people moshing with hammers in Connecticut. Uh,
Yeah,
a lot of the legends that you hear about stuff in these mosh pits, that they were always pretty scary and violent.
yeah. I think, yeah. I mean, even in the old days, like I remember the first time I saw a pit, it was still pretty violent. I mean, it was like 84 probably, and it was pretty crazy, you know. But I still, at that age though, I was like, this is pretty cool, you know. I definitely was more into it back then, I have to say.
Oh yeah, no. As you get older, you realize it's a young person's game. Like you're saying,
Yeah,
there's sort of this natural handing off that kind of has to happen in
yeah,
punk, where the next generation is going to do things slightly differently, but that's why it will continue on.
yeah. It's awesome that it continues on, actually.
Yeah,
You know, it's pretty cool that you know something we're a part of, and we picked up the torch and ran with it a little bit, and now there's young people in there, and you can hear the stuff that we did in there, but it's not the same. It's how they interpret it, and that's pretty cool, actually.
yeah. There's something really beautiful about that. Like you're saying, it's not it's never yours. It's just like you become like a steward for it for a couple years, and
Yeah.
then like something that makes it like eternal in that way because your thing will carry on, like you're saying, and people's interpretations of what you do, and just understanding. Like it's funny, Dom from Pulling Teeth and everything was on the podcast recently, and he's from Toronto originally.
Yeah.
So first time I met him was in a pit before Sick of It All played,
Huh.
and we were talking about integrity because at that time it was like a cult to be in integrity.
Yeah.
Like there was not everyone liked integrity. There was a backlash kind of to integrity. It felt like in a way, and we bonded over the fact that we both had this incredible love for this band, and so now we here we are, and it's become part of hardcore lore and hardcore history. Integrity, but at the time it was like it was a cult. It was like a small little thing. It felt like.
Yeah. Yeah. There was definitely some different reactions we got back in the day, and I mean, I think that's true. A lot of anything more maybe abrasive or just kind of maybe out of left field is at first sometimes like people are like, oh, I don't know about this. But even I mean, that might have been after the fact. I don't know what time period that was, but there's probably there was a time where maybe there you said there was a backlash. So
Yeah, I felt like there was a time where integrity, it just like a backlash to the band, or there was sort of like a, like you're saying, I think it was a sonic rejection. People weren't
yes.
necessarily ready for the music. There was
Uh-huh.
also because the band was so in your face about a lot of things like live
Yeah.
and reputation wise and everything like that. It felt like there was just, and it all, like you realize as you get older once again how much of these things are cycles. But as integrity, when integrity first kind of popped off internationally and everyone started hearing these records, I think there was like so much hype around the band, and then sort of the natural backlash that comes after that hype, and then only for people to realize and do the reassessment and come back to it and be like, no, this was fucking awesome. We were right the first time.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because sometimes you do listen to something and you're like, why did I like that? Usually I like the same things. Like I could put on like 20 years later and be like, oh, I see why I like that. And sometimes I'm not going to point anything out, but sometimes there's been things where I've listened to it again. I'd be like, oh, that doesn't really hold up as well as I remember. I remember it being different. But I appreciate that you say that though.
Well, and like you're saying, it's interesting when you do go back to stuff and it does still resonate, and you realize like, oh, there is, and it's the stuff that is timeless, the stuff that sounds like it could come out today and still
Yeah,
sound real and raw.
yeah, I agree.
Electric
And
Eels,
yeah,
Rock from the
that's true.
Tombs. Yeah.
That's raw as hell. Yeah,
Yeah.
both of those bands. I mean, there's so much raw music, and that's what I think. Almost maybe they should like rename punk. Like it's raw music. But I mean, there's other kinds of raw music, but punk is like that's the rawest music there is. I almost feel like at least you know, well, it's up there at least. You know.
It makes you, well, I guess there's something timeless about authenticity and like a way of like people being like authentic with who they are and being true to their vision and not trying to make anything other than because they want to make it. And that's something that will always ring true. Like that's something that, rings true in all these bands we've talked about.
Yeah, I agree, man. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of with my project that I those songs are like from my heart. And not only are they from my heart, but they're like something physically about playing songs that you wrote that you really like playing. It's like a physical expression. Music is not just like an acoustic expression. It's like a physical expression too, especially in the kind of music we play. I feel like, and that's like that's something that it's so interesting. And I feel like that goes like that transcends like just punk or metal or any sort of rock or R&B. That's like all music. You can hear like tribal music and speaking of a canon, some of the tribal songs you hear have been passed down for maybe thousands of years or at least hundreds of years, or flamenco music or any sort of like folk type music, because what we're playing is kind of a folk type music. It's a people's music, and if you can be part of that lineage or that canon that we were talking about, that's pretty amazing.
When I think popular music is almost about like stripping away that folk side of the music, like getting it away from that and making it as universal as possible, as opposed to something that's authentic to people's experience as possible, which is what I guess like all this traditional folk music is. And I think at its best, punk music is trying to do that. Like there's no other reason for some of these bands to make the music they made other than that they just, as I interviewed years ago, Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo.
That's awesome.
And I was like, well, yeah, and it was just like, what were the influences on Devo? Like, what inspired you? Because you've inspired everything after that, but you don't. There's nothing that sounds like you before you. And
Yeah.
he's like, there's one Roxy Music synth part that Eno did that I just loved, and then the Kent State Massacre, and realizing that humanity had
Oh,
hit a point where we weren't evolving anymore, and now it was the de-evolution of humanity. And
wow.
he's like, so combining those two things was what Devo was. And it's like, well, that's folk music. Like that's him singing to his experience as a Kent State student, seeing this shit happening, and just trying to find a way to express it, and using this one thing that he heard as being the medium to do so.
Wow. That's pretty deep. I didn't know that. That's crazy. That's, I mean, yeah, bro, I mean, that's kind of what music is as well, trying to make sense of this crazy world that we live in. That, and you know, when you're a kid, you come up and you think it's one way, and then life starts throwing curveballs at you, and you know it can be hard. And I think that our music is a way of kind of responding to that, and growing from that, and using that energy, and like, and kind of redirecting it, and throwing it back out there, and being like, okay, well, so people might say it's violent, or it's sounds like crap, or whatever they say about it, but it's kind of like a reflection of society in a lot of ways. It's not kind of like a reflection, it is a reflection it's a reflection of society, it's a reflection of the person writing it, it's a reflection of so many things of humanity. And and it's talking about something like the Kent State Massacre, that's things like that are still going on today, all over the world. There's bad things happening, and it's pretty sad.
Well, I never learned about the Armenian genocide in school. I learned about it through Integrity, and
Yeah.
there's like a not there's a sort of similarity to the Devo Kent State Massacre being the impetus of Devo, and what you're singing about, or what you guys were doing songs about, or writing songs about, or just giving voice to these things that didn't necessarily have voice, and finding a way to do it. And there's not a lot of mediums of music that offer that in the way that punk
No,
does.
no, that's true. I mean, there's some hip hop. Sometimes hip
Mhm.
hop people will go that way. A lot of times, the record companies probably won't let them, and that's kind of goes back to what you were saying. Like pop music, is we're a response to pop music. I almost don't like calling it pop music. I almost call it like corporate music. It's like corporate music, because it's like what the record company, like the big record companies and the corporate record companies, that's what they want. They want everything in their control, and they want to push a certain thing, a certain agenda. They don't want like what's that? That song "This Is America"? Have you heard that
Yeah,
song?
yeah.
Yeah. They don't want like a song like that out there. Although that's amazing that he could put that song out there. So and that's an amazing comment on on what is happening. You know, and it's not all bad. Not the whole world's not bad, but there is a lot of bad things happening.
Well, I think it speaks to that power, the power of this era, where record companies are definitely still involved, but you
Yeah.
don't necessarily need that record company anymore.
No.
And it's also interesting. We're to keep talking about raw music, and there's a power to these raw records, and I just think they sound so awesome. How real and raw and just authentic that kind of music sounds. But that's not what pop music or corporate music wants. It wants something shiny and polished, and
Yeah.
you never want it to sound raw. You never want it to sound, oh my gosh, this sounds so
No.
unfinished. And it's just that another way to strip away that authenticity to it.
Yeah, it's almost like the way they compress the music is so crazy. Like the frequencies are like separate from each other, and it just sounds like a different thing. It sounds kind of like a machine actually in a lot of, which sometimes it's cool to sound like a machine, but I prefer my machines more clunky and
Yeah,
and
fucked up
messy.
machine.
Yeah, that's the kind of machine I want. I don't know why. But
Yeah, I don't want to work it when I want a kind of broken machine that's
yeah,
kind of like just
it's
held together
cool.
by duct tape and dreams.
Yeah,
That's my kind of thing.
I think that the bass player for Knife Dance, he used to just play with 3 strings on his bass. He's like, I don't need that top one. You know, his machine was a little broken. So.
Uh, They're another band that I think only exists in Cleveland in a lot of ways, but they are so important when you talk to anyone from Cleveland
Yeah,
to the scene there.
yeah. I mean that is one of the, I saw a I think it was called the St. Valentine's Massacre. It was like a February 14th show one year. I think I was 14 or 13. I think I was 14, and I went to that show and they played, and Tom Dark was like flipping and landing on his back and singing "I'm on Fire" over and over again. And I was just like, wow, that's so cool.
I guess the Dark and the Guns are that way too, where they're bands that didn't really, obviously recordings are now available, but they didn't really get out in any sort of real way back then. But
Yeah.
anyone that saw them, or certainly has heard the recordings, knows that they were unreal.
My sister actually dated Dave Aracco, who's the drummer for the Guns. He later played drums with Integrity. He passed away pretty young from an aneurysm, but he used to come. So I had that acoustic guitar I was telling you about, and like, you know, I was playing. I knew about the Stooges and Peace Corps and stuff like that, but like, he came over. He used to like sneak down in the basement, you know, and my sister was like, "Hey, come back up here, Dave," you know. But he would be like, "Hey, Aaron, let me show you this. This is called a bar chord." And I was like, "Whoa!" Oh my! It like opened my whole world. I was like, "Oh my god!" Now I understand what all these guys are playing. I didn't understand. And then one time he brought me, he gave me or lent me the "Hell Awaits" by Slayer. That's the first time I ever heard Slayer. I think, and that just like blew my mind. And I was just like, "Wow, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard." This is like, I mean, I had a new favorite band almost instantly. You know?
That's awesome. That is, yeah, rest in
yeah,
peace.
Yeah, man, definitely.
But it certainly is like, once again, that kind of continuation. The fact that these guys were directly kind of around or involved in, you know, the next wave of stuff.
So he's someone who made the leap as well. That, I was remiss in mentioning.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I love all that early Guns and Dark stuff that came out on that CD years ago. Grand Theft Audio, I think, did it years ago, but
yeah,
it was fantastic.
The Guns stuff is. I mean, I love the Dark as well, but the Guns is like that was like that's another band that, you know, I heard that stuff and I was like, they have a song called "I'm Not Right." I think they kind of maybe influenced by "I Got It Right" by the Stooges, but the riff is sick. You know what I mean? It's like,
sick. Yeah.
it just has so much energy in behind it. You know, it's just like, wow, like how do they have so much energy in just that simple riff? I think it's just a 2-riff song as well. I believe so.
There's yeah, because there's that Cleveland is it the Cleveland Confidential comp they're on? No,
they're on. That's those songs. I'm trying to think. Is that New Hope comp maybe?
The New Hope comp. Sorry, that's it. Yeah.
I'm Not Right, and is Locked Inside on that too?
Yeah, I think that's the other one on there. But there's like a lot of great compilations for Cleveland, like you're saying, where these one band or bands have 1 or 2 songs that came out just on these comps and that's it. But they're all like raging.
Yeah. There's a lot of good songs on that actually.
This has been awesome. And anytime you want to come back on here, Aaron, please know you're always welcome. Because as I said, your new record's fantastic. Everything you do is awesome, and I every time you put out something new, I can't wait to hear it.
I appreciate that a lot. I just want to say one more thing. I also, so with the record, I also have been writing a science fiction book, and that's going to be very related to the record, and that's going to come out in a couple weeks. I'm self-publishing that one, so there was a snafu at the old publisher. So, but it's also called Bringing Out the Beast, just like the Nuclae record is called, and it has similar themes to the record. So
Thanks so much for doing this, man.
hey, man, great talking to you. It was awesome.
Thank you, Aaron, for coming on the show. And you're right there. Aaron will be back for a part 2 at some point in the future because there is a lot more to get to. I warned you in advance this thing wasn't long enough. In the meantime, check out the phenomenal Bringing Out the Beast album from the fantastic Nuclae, which is available now on Rebirth Records. It's great to hear the Melnicks playing this kind of music again together. It is, this thing's a monster. And also keep your eyes open for that book Aaron mentioned. That has not dropped yet, but it will be available soon. And that is probably going to be on that Nuclae Bandcamp or also on a Rebirth Records webpage. I know you wish that episode was way longer, Cam, right? No? No. Okay. Well, coming up on the next episode of Turned Out a Punk, a good buddy, a good pal, my man, Jason Green, is coming back to the show for kind of his first part 2, but he did a part 2 with Walter, but this is the real part 2. Jason, of course, is the lead singer of Panthers, or was lead singer of Panthers, and was the lead singer of Orchid, and now is the lead singer of Orchid again, because Orchid has announced a string of reunion shows. We talk about that. We talk about all sorts of stuff, including Jason's brand new solo record, 12-inch, released on the venerable DFA Records out of New York City, Jason Green and the Jerk. And this thing is awesome. This 12-inch is fantastic. You can find that on Bandcamps and everywhere now, streaming services and everything now. This is a fun episode, and I can't wait for you to hear it. All right, well, that's it for this episode. Remember, as always, Black Lives Matter. The lives and issues faced by Indigenous peoples all over the world matter. We need to protect trans kids and help trans people protect themselves and their rights. And stop hate and violence towards people of different faiths, different races, different sexualities, different nationalities, because we're not talking about politics. This is just basic human rights stuff. People deserve to be able to live free from hate and violence and discrimination. And so if there's organizations in your community that are affecting positive change, get involved. Donate your time, donate your money if you have extra money.
Just get involved.
Thank you, Cam. I love you so much. Speaking of getting involved, get involved in your local punk scene. Start a band, start a fanzine, podcasts are not cool, but you could start a podcast. You can start doing flyers. You can start putting on shows. You can start helping out at shows. There's tons of ways to get involved. And this scene gets better for everyone, including yourself, once you get involved in it. So go out there and get involved. Speaking of going out there and doing something, sign your organ donor cards, because by the time they come looking for those organs, you're dead. You don't need those organs anymore. Well, they don't come when you're alive, Cam, and take the organs. They wait till you're passed away. But we have seen miracles happen when people had organs transplant, right? We have people in our family that had organ transplants and are much, much healthier now and able to live now, right? Cam's nodding. It doesn't really pick up on the podcast as much, but what else do I do? Oh, try meditating. I try and get the kids to meditate with me, but they really don't like meditating with me. Why don't you guys like meditating with me, you think? Okay. They're over this right now, so I'll just speed this up. So try meditating. That's it. Stay safe, and I will see you on the next episode. Anything to add, Cam?
No.
No? Do you want to tell people to go listen to Nirvana or anything?
No.
I love you.
They're laughing.